Hi there. So in this video, we're going to take a look at a little bit more practice about monopoly and identifying different things in those graphs. And there's this first part, and then there's a part B that involves another Jacob Clifford video where it's deadweight loss and analysis of producer and consumer surplus. So let's get started. So this first graph shows a monopoly. We can actually identify right off the bat that it's an artificial monopoly. And we know that because we have a U-shaped ATC and an upward sloping marginal cost curve. Remember, a natural monopoly would just have a downward sloping ATC and maybe even a horizontal MC. So the first thing we're going to do is determine the price. Now, in order to figure out the price, we actually have to know how much this monopoly is producing. And they produce where MR equals MC. So that's the quantity. And so we'll look and we'll see, well, they're going to produce at MC equals MR at that quantity 50. And so then we go up to the demand curve to find the price at quantity 50. And we notice that the price is 40. Okay, so the next step is total revenue, and total revenue we know is just price times quantity, and we've already established that the quantity is 50 and that the price is 40, so it's 40 times 50 is $2,000. So that's how much revenue this firm is generating. It's also the area kind of this box, and I'm not going to shade it on here, but you can actually kind of visualize what that total revenue will look like. Now, the next part says total cost, and that's just going to be the ATC at the quantity we're producing times the quantity, right? Because if you think about it, ATC is equal to total cost divided by the quantity. So in order to solve for what's the total cost, we just multiply quantity by ATC. So we know the quantity, we've established that as 50, right? But what's the ATC? I always want to do a star. That's my own mistake. So what's the ATC? Well, at quantity 50, the ATC is here. And so we go over and we see that it's 30. So 30 times 50 is 1,500. And so we can actually see here, if we kind of visualize a little box right there, this box here at the bottom is the total cost box. And so that leaves a box that's right here for the profit, right? You know, and we kind of think about that there's this profit box that goes from the price 40 down to 30 and over, and that's the profit. Now, so the two ways we could calculate that would be the difference between the two. We could say, you know, 40 minus 30 times the quantity of 50. So that's equal to 10 times 50, which is 500. The other way we could solve this problem is just by doing total revenue minus total cost. 2,000 minus 1,500 is 500. So both of those should yield the same answer. Now the last part says deadweight loss. So deadweight loss is going to be from where supply and demand intercept, right? The socially optimal quantity where supply and demand intercept over to the quantity that we actually are producing. And so we know that we're actually producing 50. So it's going to be this triangle right here. And we know marginal cost equals supply. We've talked about that a lot, that it's just the cost curve for the firm. So supply and demand intercept here. And so that's the socially optimal point. And so this kind of over to the quantity is this triangle right here. Now, we are looking for an area. So the simple thing to do is actually observe, you know, that this triangle has basically the same size on the top and on the bottom of it. It goes from 40 to 36, and that's 4, and 36 to 32 is 4. And so we can actually just use the area of the triangle to do that. So the height of the triangle is 4, right, times the base, which is 20. And we know that because it's the difference of 70 and 50, right? Base times height divided by 2. And it's actually 2 triangles, so we don't need to divide by 2. So it's really just $80. So there are a couple ways to find the area of that triangle. You use whichever one you're most comfortable with, but it is 80. Okay, now for this next part, go ahead and watch the next video that's in the playlist where it's Micro 4.3 Monopoly Deadweight Loss Review. Pause this video. We're going to return to it at the end and make sure that your answers look good. Okay, so hopefully you watched that video. The next one that's in the playlist is called Monopoly Deadweight Loss Review. I think he's changed the name on me and he doesn't have this first part on here. So it's just called Monopoly Deadweight Loss Review. It's a really great comparison of the two. So let's go ahead and check to see that you can replicate that information. So I'm going to actually go ahead and draw these and then you can compare your answers to mine. So the first thing we're going to do is have price and quantity on both axes for these. And the perfectly competitive market is pretty easy to draw. We just do supply and demand, and we have the little over to the price and the quantity, Q star, P star, and we'd say shade the consumer and the producer surplus, and there isn't any deadweight loss in a perfectly competitive market, because this is what we call allocative efficiency, which is another way of saying that, that we have supply equals demand, or we are at the socially optimal, right? Those are all things that mean the same thing. So this is the allocative efficient parts. We don't have any deadweight loss. Now for a monopoly, we would say you've got this demand curve that tells us the price, and we've got a separated marginal revenue curve. And in his example, right, he's got this marginal cost curve that equals the supply curve here. And we know that they're going to produce at the quantity where MR equals MC, Q star, and they're going to price way up here at P star, but that's not what the socially optimal point is, right? That's the optimal point where they're allocative efficient, where their supply equals demand. And so that's going to tell us, right, that we've got consumer surplus up here, just this little itty bitty triangle, right? And then this area is the producer surplus, is all that. So that leaves deadweight loss there. Okay, and so we can actually say, this is the optimal quantity, and that's the optimal price, and all that good stuff. Now, if deadweight loss occurs, what can we make this, what can we say? We can say it's not allocative efficient. And there's really two types of efficiency. There's productive efficiency and allocative efficiency. And we'll look at actually the other type as well in one of these practice problems. But this is allocative efficient. It just means supply equals demand, or marginal cost equals the price. What can we say about marginal revenue that causes the deadweight loss to happen? Well, it's that marginal revenue does not equal the demand, which does equal the price, and that's what causes that to happen, is because they're going to rely on MR equals MC to decide the quantity to produce, and they're not going to use the demand curve for that purpose. They're only going to use the demand curve for the price. Now it says, is consumer surplus larger or smaller in a monopoly than in perfect competition? Why? Well, you can pretty clearly see consumer surplus is smaller. And why is that? Well, consumer surplus goes from the price they pay up to the demand curve. And what's happening here is that in a monopoly, the consumers are going to pay a higher price. And so we'd say smaller because price is higher in monopoly. Right? And why is that? Well, it's because the demand curve is how they price. They don't price way down here. That would be silly, right? They don't use that point. They price on the demand curve, and they choose the quantity where MR equals MC. What are the other examples of deadweight loss, and why does it occur? And we would say maybe in taxes, right? We've seen that with taxes, and that's because the price is higher and the quantity is lower. That's what happens with a tax, is typically we see a higher price and a lower quantity of transactions. You could have also said, price floor, price ceiling, a quota, right? Those are all part of the explanation. But in general, we would say deadweight loss happens because the quantity is too small, right? We have too little transactions, too few transactions is kind of the big picture there. So in this practice, right, we've talked about allocative efficiency. Really try to make sure you understand that idea. It's where marginal cost equals the price, or where supply equals demand. It's what we call socially optimal. Hopefully this helped you. See you next time.